Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Quotation again. In this video, we are going to discuss about the reference data types and the reference variables. If you have not subscribed to the channel yet, please do me a favor and do subscribe the channel. Let's begin. Now data types in Java, as we already discussed in one of our previous videos, it is classified into primitive data types and non-primitive or reference data types. For primitive data types, you can check one of our previous videos. I'll put the link in the description. For non-primitive or reference data types, they are classes, interfaces, arrays, and strings. Now don't worry about all this like terms or jargons. We will cover each and every of this topic in detail in coming videos. But just remember these are the reference data types. And why it is called a reference data types? Because it refer to objects. Objects are instances of classes. And Java is an object-oriented language. It's all about classes and objects. So the programming revolves around objects. When it is said that an object is of type X, it means that that object is an instance of class X. We will discuss this as well in classes and objects when we will cover that topic. But for now, these are the reference data types which refer to objects. Now, what are reference variables? Primitive variables we cover, basically we cover the variables in one of our previous video. For that also I'll put the link in the description. But like primitive variable, just to say again, it is like think it of a box. If you put a primitive value in it, the actual value is stored in that variable. This is in contrast with reference variables because reference variables don't store the actual objects. They store the address of that object. Actual object is stored in a heap memory. And primitive data types, these are stored in the stack memory. What is heap and what is stack, that also we will study later. But for now, just consider that these reference variables refer to objects. They don't contain the actual object. Primitive data types, primitive variables, they contain the actual value, but reference variables, they do not contain the actual objects. They contain the address or a way to go to that object. So suppose dog is a class. So declaration will be done in the same way like dog is a data type and then my dog is a variable and then I'm initializing with this new constructor, creating a new object dog. So this object is stored in heap memory and this variable will have the address of this object. So this actual object will not be stored in this variable. It will just have a way or an address to access that object. Now, what are the similarities and the difference between reference variables and primitive variables? Similarities is like in primitive variables, we read that we can declare multiple variables on the same line of the same type. Same with the reference variables as well. But again, this is not a good practice. The naming convention of the variables is also same. Whatever rules apply for primitive variables, the same apply here. Initialization is also important. Like Java needs explicit initialization and constants also. Like primitive variables also we read if you prefix it with final it will become constant, and same with the reference variables. If you prefix it with final it will become constant and you cannot change the value there. What are the differences? Main difference is primitive variables actually store the value, but reference variables do not store the actual objects. They just contain the address of that object, and that object is stored in heap memory. And for primitive it is the stack memory. Declaration is like for primitive it was easy. You put a type name and then equal to the actual value. And here it is like you construct an object for that. Now one important point is when I say about this initialization, that initialization is important. Static and instant variables, both primitive and reference, they don't need explicit initialization. But this we will read when we will understand about classes and objects. Then we will know what are static and instance variables and why they don't need an explicit initializations. Now let's start with the practical for reference data type and variable. Now, what was one of the reference data type we read? It was class. So first let's create a class which we will use as a reference data type. Let me say it dog. And inside this class, I'll create a method. Don't worry about the signature of the method. We will discuss in detail about this when we'll study about method. So I've created a simple method bark, which will do nothing. It will just print that dog is barking. Now to show the usage for reference data type and variable, let us create a class, say ref data type, and in this class we can create a main method. Now how the reference data variables are declared? Data type, then the variable name. And naming convention wise, it's the same rules that apply for primitives. So it can start with underscore, it can start with dollar, but it cannot start with numbers. So it will give compilation error. And one more thing, like of the same data types, just as in a primitive, you can declare multiple variables. So this will also work fine, but this is not a good practice. So, and about the explicit initialization. So right now I have not explicitly initialized my reference data variable, my dog. If I try to use this variable, then it shows me a compilation error. So if I try to run this code, what will happen? It will give you a compilation error. See, my dog might not have been initialized. Now here comes the difference between primitive and reference data variable. To initialize it, we'll use the constructor dog. So this object is created, my dog, but remember this variable does not have the actual object, it just have a reference. That's why these are called a reference variable. It just have a reference for that object. Now if you will run the code, it will compile and then it yeah, dog is barking. This is printed. Now let's see how I can create a constant this. So just as in primitive, if I make this as final and then let me put as like my dog is equal to new dog, then you can see here it is giving a red line which indicates a compilation error. So if I try to run this code, it should tell that it is defined as final and cannot be changed. So this has become a constant, cannot assign a value to final variable my dog. So that's it from the practical side as well. So this concludes this section in which we discuss about the reference data type and the variable. We also see the practical for this. If you like this video, please hit the like button, do share it with your friends, and please subscribe to the channel Quotation. Thank you so much. See you in the next video.